It is no secret that Africa is one of the most important or the biggest exporter of natural resources across the world. When you take, for instance, products like cocoa, coffee, timber, you will see or you'll notice that the top exporter worldwide are actually African countries. But if Africa is faring so well in terms of international export of its natural resources, let's take a look at how much money this economy system is bringing back to the entire continent as a whole. Unfortunately, when looking at the amount of money that Africa is making from selling its natural commodities, though the money overall, might be important, unfortunately, it does not represent a small percentage compared to what those international manufacturers and international businesses are making from transforming the raw resources into a final product. Today, as young African intellectuals, we would like to reflect over the situation. We would like to think of very interesting and very business-like policies that can help African countries making the most of their natural resources while also being fair to the international market. Welcome to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African. I'm S.I.K.A and I'm happy to be with you today. Today, we have a very special episode because this is mark the beginning of the new version of your favorite podcast. I'm going to have a very interesting and incredible guest speaker who is going to share his perspective on the topic I actually just introduced. If you're not a member of our community, I invite you to click on the subscribe button and to also activate the ring bell so that you don't miss out on the very interesting upcoming episode. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest, very first guest of S.I.K.A Talks. Her name is Chioma, and she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chioma. So I am a Nigerian-born woman currently living and raised in South Africa. I studied in the health science industry, worked there for a bit, then switched to corporate, and now I'm running a business in the beauty industry. So I feel that I have kind of hopscotched around enough to give me like a broad perspective on the different sectors of our economy.
Thank you very much, guys. As you noticed, Chioma is our very first guest and she's a woman. And I think I just wanted to tell you that I'm very happy to have her, and I hope you're going to enjoy this episode. Chioma is from Nigeria. She's also from South Africa because she's been living in South Africa for over 20 years. So she has dual citizenship. She's very smart, and we are very happy to hear from her, like to hear her perspective when it comes to the situation with regard to African natural resources and how best could we make sure that, the continent is making, more money. So I'm going to start this conversation by asking her like a very first question. In your opinion, Chioma, what do you think of this current situation of international export of natural resources from Africa to the international market? What is your view on this one?
I think we're at the point where Africa is basically the main source of most of the international market's resources. Mm-hmm. So if any of the superpowers, chances are they source their materials from Africa, be it food-based, shelter-based, or for technological advancements. So Africa does hold a huge power in regards to that, but for some reason, which will be discussed later, the share of how we are reciprocated for that, for providing our resources, doesn't balance up quite as much as us buying back the things that are made with those resources. Mm-hmm. So I think Africa is in a position where it can better its negotiations or its stand with the world, because we do hold quite a bit of power in regards to having everything in our land, but also maintaining that we need to make sure our land is ours.
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting. I think I understand the rationale here. I agree with you. Yes, of course, Africa holds a lot of the natural resources that the international market needs. But my one of my key concerns with this approach is that unfortunately, yes, we do own, but unfortunately, we don't own the tools, to actually make sure that we can transform whatever raw materials we have into a final product. So if I hear you correctly, what you are suggesting to actually hold off on our natural resources in order to get a better price. What might happen if the international community is trying to source their production from another market or another continent? What are we going to do with the natural resources left at our disposal?
I think that's when intertrade comes in. Africa is quite large. We've got a huge population and we've got huge economies attached to that population, and we've got it within ourselves. Kicking out international markets, except for Africa, would give us time to stabilize within ourselves. I think it would take a little bit of a knock to our general income, but if we think of the long run, having a sustainable market that is more beneficial to the African, the way we can negotiate better terms with the Greater West and see us getting paid a little bit better for what we have, I think it's worth it in the long run. I do think it will lead to a lot of resistance, especially in the beginning, because telling superpowers we are not giving resources for a few until you pay us more can result in quite a lot of shaky economy. But it is something that needs to be done because it's been a trend that we've had for years, decades even, where Africa has been paid the least of everything. Whereas if we were to import raw resources from abroad, we are paying out of our noses for that. So that's just something that we need to balance off first to make sure whatever income comes to us is income that is generally accepted and it's fair. Because us paying extra to bring in and they pay a fraction of the cost to take more than what we take from them, it really puts us at a great disadvantage, especially considering that we are still a growing economy. So we need more of our resources. We need more of our capital to make sure that our economies can function, that our citizens can live a fruitful life and see more advancements in their time. And with them not paying enough, it becomes a challenge.
Okay, but now I hear you. Okay, I'm an advocate of Pan-Africanisms, but I prefer the economic side of Pan-Africanisms instead of the political side of Pan-Africanisms. But another key concept with this approach is you've suggested intertrade.
Yes.
But in my opinion, intertrade cannot be the solution. Why? Unfortunately, when looking at the entire African continent, there is no region or no African market that is actually mature enough in terms of owning or having manufacturers that are capable of transforming, every natural resources that we have.
Yeah.
If we take, for example, crude oil, you are from Nigeria, and your country is one of the largest producers of crude oil.
Yes.
There's also countries like Gabon, and recently we've even, found a new reserve of crude oil in Cote d'Ivoire and in Senegal. So overall, the majority of African countries have been blessed in terms of natural resources. But unfortunately, if we were to actually promote intra-trade among ourselves, my key concern is that we might not be able to actually rely on the entirety of our natural resources because we still have a very low quantity of manufacturers, on the continent. Second, in terms of the skills, we also have, like a scarcity in terms of skills and also in terms of human capital. So how, in your opinion, could we actually make sure that this kind of limits will not come back and bite us down?
I don't propose intertrade as like the end all and the be all. Let's forget the rest of the world and just keep it. I think intertrade is a great way to start off, to show that we have power amongst ourselves as Africans, and also to fend off while we negotiate better rates. And if you look at Africa in general, yes, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Nigeria have crude oil, but South Africa doesn't. South Africa has manpower and it has like a little bit more technological advancements. So we can look at parts of Africa and see where can we pinpoint places that can be better manufacturers. Nigeria just put up a refining station. It's not the best, but it's a start. And I think like as we intertrade, as we get more payments for our resources, we're able to invest it back into being better manufacturers, having better processing for our raw materials. And it might not look the way the Western world's own looks, but it should be effective and like good enough for the African society. Because even if you look at the way agriculture was, our sort of agriculture did not damage the environment, but it was enough to maintain the entirety of our countries, of our communities. So if there are ways to implement that, our traditional forms of agriculture, and just improve on it in the African sense without like influence from external worlds, I think there could be ways that we could develop without looking at how others have developed. I think we when we think of development, we tend to think of it in only the Western light. We need big tractors, we need big we need whatever. We need the technology that they have developed to do what we now do. And that's just not the way that it could be. There could be so many different ways. And I think that needs us to invest a little bit more into our African mindset, to go back and see what our traditions were and how we can like develop from that. Not look at what the rest of the world is doing and trying to bring that into Africa, because that might not work for us, especially if we're looking into a section where we are not going to trade internationally like that. If we are doing intertrading, then we might as well intertrade our knowledge as well, and see how, if a process done well in Gambia can be transferred to Nigeria, if something done in Nigeria can be transferred to South Africa, and do that amongst ourselves. We are a continent of billions of people. There are developments that we can do by ourselves without influence from the Western world.
I hope you've enjoyed this very first part of our conversation. I personally did. I look forward to seeing you for the second part of this brilliant and very dynamic discussion with Chioma. Thank you for taking the time to supporting and also listening to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African, the podcast where strong realities meet powerful perspectives. Stay tuned and à bientôt.